I was first asked to give my TED Talk, I was extremely excited. I mean, how cool, I'm 23, how cool would it be to give a TED Talk and get to share my personal experience with so many of you? One of the things on my list of accomplishments before I go is to inspire and give a motivational speech. So I want to thank you for being a part of that check mark off my list of things to accomplish. And then I started to write my speech. And the excitement went from excitement to fear and embarrassment and shame. Because I'm sharing with you today a very personal story. And I was ashamed of my background. I was ashamed of my circumstances. And I struggled as a young adult to come to grips with what I had gone through and how I was going to achieve more. So I was asked to speak with you today because I was a pretty successful college student. I was extremely involved. I was president of my sorority. I graduated with 2 degrees. I volunteered within the community. I did college pretty well, which is probably why I'm going into higher education. So I was successful. But why was I successful? I started to list out the things that I felt had made a major impact in my success as a college student, and I realized that it wasn't people that I became friends with, but people who impacted me through education. And all of the different elements came back to education. So then I thought, well, what was the flame that kind of sparked me to achieve more because of my circumstances? And I'm going to tell you a story. Happened while I was in college. I took a development class. And in this development class, we talked about how students who grew up in low-income households or grew up in poverty, experienced or witnessed domestic violence, they weren't going to graduate high school. And they were even less likely to attend college. They're more likely to continue the cycle, the unfortunate cycle of poverty, and raise at-risk children and continue the cycle on and on and on. I was angry when I heard this because I felt like they were basically telling me, you're set up for failure. My professor talked about how very few ever make it out of their circumstances, which is unfortunate, but that's how it happens. And I wrote in my final reflection paper, one, that she had no idea the audience she was speaking to. Did she realize that there were several students, I'm sure, in her class who felt the same way I did? You just told me that I was here for nothing, that I was a statistic, and I will more than likely fail. And I felt like society had set me up for this failure. They said, there are barriers, there are limitations, and it's going to be difficult for you, so you're not going to make it out. So this made me mad, and this is before the term challenge accepted was very popular, but I'm sure in my mind I was thinking, challenge accepted, let's go, I'm going to be successful. I want to start by telling you that I'm not unique. I know that tens of thousands of college students have faced adversity. They come from various backgrounds and circumstances that we couldn't help, and we didn't ask for the circumstances that we were put in. And a lot of them are going to college and they're trying to achieve more. So this is my individual perspective and how higher education made it possible for me to be successful. I'm going to start today by talking about the basic resources. So according to the Center for Strategic and International Studies, food, water, and energy are the main resources that will help us solve our global issues. I agree we need those 3 resources, but I also think that we're missing one final link, and that's education. I'm going to talk specifically about higher education in the United States, but I do want to point out that I believe education can solve global issues. According to the Global Partnership for Education, educating in poverty-stricken areas is the single most effective way to solve that poverty. But I want to talk about a new student population that's in need. Just going to share a couple of resources. So the overall poverty in the United States as of 2013 was almost 15%. And to make it a little closer to home, here in Hays, Kansas, we're pretty close to the national average as well. Although I did not grow up in what is considered poverty, I grew up in what we describe as a low-income household. So for a family of 7, because I come from a family of 7, in order to be considered low income, you make a combined average of $55,095 a year. My parents made a significantly lower amount due to a lack of jobs, a lack of education to get a well-paying job, and various issues. So I want to share with you what that personal experience was like. I want to start off by saying that I am extremely thankful for what I have and the sacrifices my parents made in order for me to achieve the great lengths that I did. I don't blame my parents for my circumstances because just like myself, I don't think they could help the situations they were in. They didn't graduate college. I have a parent who's gone back to college recognizing the need for it, but they were limited to the jobs that they could get and the money that they can make in order to support their family. I'm extremely thankful for people in my life who invested in me and helped me have positive experiences because I did get to go on college trips or high school trips. I was able to be an athlete and be a part of student organizations because they felt like it was important for my development. So I just want to say that I am thankful and I understand that sometimes we can't help the circumstances we are in. So what does that life look like? Some of you are probably going to be able to relate to me and understand why it was so difficult to think that higher education was a resource when you grew up dealing with some of these similar issues. In the United States, we have several things that we consider basic necessities to the American living, like heat, electricity, hot water, food. But in my household, those basic necessities weren't always accessible. I have had days where there was no electricity in my home. I grew up heating water on a stove and carrying it to the bathtub because hot water was not always affordable. I have very vivid memories of sleeping on a kitchen floor with the oven on because heating the house was just not affordable, and it was better to all sleep in one room together in order to stay warm. There were days when we struggled to know where the funding would come from in order to provide meals, and I was qualified for government programming that allowed me to eat for free at school. I grew up with vehicles that always broke down. I grew up in a hostile environment that was caused by not having enough to make ends meet. And my parents' economic situation led to a divorce, which actually financially helped our family out tremendously. However, by then I had already experienced so many things in my life. And that didn't just stop once I made it to college. I still faced, well, I can't do this and I can't do that. I don't want to be a part of this because I can't afford it. And I didn't want to admit why I couldn't buy a $4 cup of Starbucks coffee, which for those of you who know me, I now buy sometimes twice a day. And I'd like to mention that higher education was the greatest thing that happened to me. Since I've been in college, and I'm in my master's program, so I've been here 6 years, not once have I lacked the basic necessities that so many of my peers just naturally grew up with. The impact of education for young adults is huge, especially ones who went out without for so long in their lives. So what do? Perhaps you're thinking, okay, big deal, higher education. Well, it has a tremendous impact not only on myself, but for so many other students who were in my exact same shoes. 1 in 10 low-income students will actually attain a bachelor's degree by 25, and that's unfortunate because according to the White House report of 2014, those who do obtain a bachelor's degree will have greater lifetime earnings, lower unemployment rates, and lower poverty rates. And then this last statistic is really what gets me on fire. According to studies, when a student gains a bachelor's degree and they were born into the bottom fifth of the distribution level, their chances of making it to the top of the income distribution nearly quadruple. And their chances of making it out of the bottom, not to the middle, not to the top, but just out of the bottom distribution, increase by 50%. They have a 50% chance to change their future and the outcome that was already predicted for them when I took that development course. So how do we help them? Why aren't they just going to college like the rest of us who took the initiative to apply? Well, there are several barriers, and I'm going to talk about them with you. Of the 2 million students over the next decade will not go to college because of financial barriers. So funding is the first and most important barrier that these students face because they lack financial literacy. They don't understand the financial aid process. The second is a lack of knowledge. Many of them are first generation and they don't even know how to apply to admissions. They have fear and a lack of support. If they're helping provide for their family, they are terrified to leave their siblings and their parents to create the benefits on their own. And then they don't think there is a need. I have a lot of classmates who went into jobs right out of high school because although it's not what they wanted to do, it was a paycheck, and that was better than growing up living the way that they had grown up. So how can we prepare them? I am very passionate about the idea that it should be considered a resource from the very beginning. Whether or not Susie and Tommy have the same household lifestyles, they should both be encouraged to attend higher education. But within the high schools, so before they come to college, we should be giving them financial literacy sessions, helping them understand what financial aid is and how it's going to impact them. Many students won't apply for financial aid because they don't want loans. I'm going to share with you that by the time I graduate with my master's degree, I will be at a minimum $50,000 in debt. But I know that my master's is going to help me pay off that debt, and that it's going to elevate me to levels of success so that I don't have to put my family through what I went through. The second is the process. Hold sessions in high schools that actually explain to them how you apply to college and what that means and the necessary paperwork to apply to college. Transportation. You can set up an ACT testing day and you can set up a college visit, but what do you do if you can't get there? Because like me, my parents didn't always have a vehicle to get me where I needed to go. We can set up motor pools through high schools, and we can also ask faculty who have made a commitment to help ensure young adult success to volunteer to drive students to college visits. And then my last point is that there are several programs that you can implement and initiate within your high schools, like the GLOW program, Quest Bridge, and also CalSOAP, that are helping directly target low-income students recognize that education is needed and that they have the ability to pursue higher education. Early preparation is key. You want to start them out successful in high school so that when they come to college, they will also be successful. Because once they reach campus, it's really not that easy. I was ashamed when I came to campus. I didn't want people to know that I didn't have a lot. I didn't want to share how much financial aid I received because it's kind of embarrassing. If you receive a lot, that means you didn't come from a lot. And so I didn't want to reach out, but I was constantly told, you need to be involved, you need to get good grades, this is how you set yourself up for success. But I didn't have that capability. Until I went to graduate school, I worked 2 jobs my entire way through college, and I still maintained the ability to be successful, but it's because people told me that I could do it, and I had a lot of support. According to Professor Snyder at the Northwestern University, many times students from low-income households, this shame makes them feel isolated and excluded because they don't want to admit that they didn't come from a lot, and they're not going to ask for emotional support because, once again, that would have to mean admitting that they face barriers in their lives. So I have a couple ideas for what a solution would look like. And the first, of course, is early preparation. So start in the high schools because it's important that they know ahead of time. The second is offering resources to them. And those resources could include financial aid, education. When I first got my financial aid reimbursement, I cried. I was like, I've never seen that much money in my life. What do I do with it? I didn't spend it wisely because no one had told me how to deal with my finances because I've never had any finances to deal with. The next is create easily accessible jobs and tell students that they're there. Inform students of the many jobs that are offered on campuses. Create open education resources to cut back on book costs. Offer free services like counseling, tutoring, and health services. I didn't want to go to the hospital because I knew that I didn't have health insurance and I couldn't afford my hospital bill. So make sure that students know that these are resources that are offered to them. Create programs that address specific students with needs, like our undocumented students who can apply for DACA, and our first-generation students whose parents also need to know what that process looks like. And then my final level would be support, a mentoring program. Mentoring students can have a persistence and completion rate increase of 4%. It's so important that the faculty and staff who commit themselves to higher education know that they need to be giving back to the students. And I'm going to share my own personal experience of how mentoring impacted my life. And I'm going to give a shout out to a couple of them. Vince Bauhay, who's the assistant director of the Memorial Union here at Fort Hays, is truly an inspirational person and took me under his wing as a timid, shy freshman who wanted nothing to do with being involved. And he helped me develop my leadership skills and created opportunities for me. He never questioned my hesitation to be involved on campus because I always hesitated because I couldn't afford it and I couldn't miss out on my job. And he created a foundation of trust. He made me feel comfortable enough to talk to him about my personal issues, although we never addressed my financial issues. And when I was a junior in college, I wanted to travel to El Salvador. I was a student who had lacked resources in my life, but I recognized that I wasn't the only one and that some people's situations were a lot worse than mine. So I wanted to serve a population in need, but I knew that I'd never be able to afford it. And I received a text message one day, and he said, "Holly, if you didn't have financial barriers," and I had never admitted to him that I did, "would you still want to go to El Salvador?" And I was like, "Yeah, I can't ask my parents, though. That's out of the question." And he said, "Okay, thank you." Didn't hear from him. And then I got a phone call. And he said, "You're going to El Salvador. You should probably go get your passport," because this was 4 months before the trip. And he said, "And I found an opportunity that's going to help fund that trip for you." That's real mentoring. That's seeing an opportunity for a student, seeking out the resources for them, and then building their developmental skills. Because it created me into a leader, and I came back and used those leadership skills when I came to campus. I've also been blessed to know Dr. Christy Brungart, who has helped develop me professionally and allow me to turn a passion into a career. And just recently, I started working for Dr. Keegan Nichols and Brett Bruner in the Division of Student Affairs. And I'm so impacted by their ability to develop me professionally so that I know when I graduate, I'm going to be successful and that I'm going to have people that I can rely on to help build me up into success. So mentoring and giving back, I want to end that education is honestly the key to our resource, or the key and the resource to offer to help solve so many of our global issues. But we can't just make it a resource and say, here's education. We have to make it a viable resource. We have to make sure that students can actually go to college and feel safe and wanted on a college campus. If you're a college student, I know that you're facing internal battles. We face them every single day. I hope that you reach out to the resources that are available to you, because I truly believe that you can change the world. Education is not a privilege. I believe it is a right. Nelson Mandela said that education is the weapon which you can use to change the world. I encourage you to use your opportunity here in higher education and use every resource possible to make sure that you're changing the world. And to institutions and educators, I hope that you'll create programs to make this process easier, to make your students feel empowered so that they too can change the world. Thank you.